Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking a really fascinating chapter in economic history. We're going to dive right in and explore the core economic motivations behind Sri Lanka's historical shift toward privatization. If you've ever wondered why a government decides to just hand over the reins of its businesses to the private sector, what they actually hope to achieve by doing so, and what happens when that grand plan doesn't entirely work out, well, you are in exactly the right place. We are going to look strictly at the data and the historical record to see exactly how and why this massive transformation unfolded.
Section 1. The Open Economic Policy.
Right, so to really understand the why, we first need to set the historical stage. This transition, it didn't just happen overnight. At its core, the foundational mechanism of Sri Lanka's open economic policy was privatization. So what exactly are we talking about here? Basically, it just means transferring the ownership or even just the management of state-owned enterprises straight over to the private sector. And let me tell you, this was a massive paradigm shift. Prior to the 1980s, the baseline was heavy state ownership. The government practically ran all these enterprises. But this new approach, it pivoted sharply toward private sector management. The intended economic shift was literally a complete change in the national playbook.
So in the early 1980s, the government starts taking its very first initial steps. They began heavily encouraging private sector participation. How they do it? Well, by offering incentives, drumming up domestic competition, and quite specifically, closing down loss-making state enterprises while handing the management of others directly to the private sector. The immediate focus here was purely on improving commercial performance right out of the gate, just making these entities fundamentally better at doing business.
Section 2. Economic Goals of Privatization. By 1987, that early momentum had evolved, and privatization was formally recognized as an official public policy, which begs the absolute most important question we can ask today. What were the main economic objectives? Why make this a formal, sweeping government policy? Let's pivot directly into the why before we tackle the how. It's actually fascinating just how ambitious these 5 goals were back in 1987. Let's walk through them together. Number 1, improve economic efficiency and productivity. 2, increase profitability and overall financial performance. 3, improve product quality through greater investment. 4, create new employment opportunities. And finally, number 5, reduce the burden on the government budget. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that the primary driver was this powerful desire to relieve severe financial strain on the government, all while simultaneously trying to turbocharge overall market performance. Section 3. Reforming Laws and Institutions. Now, you can't just announce a massive economic policy and hope for the best, right? You absolutely need a legal framework. To do that, the government needed brand new laws. So, the Public Enterprises Act No. 22 of 1987 and the State Corporations Act No. 23 of 1987 were passed. These 2 specific acts are essential because they provided the exact legal basis required to actually start restructuring these state enterprises to meet those 5 economic goals we just looked at. Okay, so with the laws in place, they needed the actual organizations to enforce them. And the chronological rollout was very systematic. First, in 1987, the Presidential Commission for Privatization was established to plan and implement the program. Over time, the government systematically built out other bodies to manage and execute these reforms. This included the Public Investment Management Company and later on, the Public Enterprise Reform Commission, commonly known as PERC. It was a very deliberate step-by-step institutional rollout.
Section 4. 2 decades of developments.
All right, with the foundation fully set, the policy moved into real-world application over the next couple of decades. This was a sustained, massive effort. We start in 1987 with that formal public policy recognition. Then we move right into an aggressive, major implementation phase from 1989 all the way to 2001. Finally, we see a big strategic pivot in 2004 with the establishment of SEMA. Let's break down exactly what happened during that aggressive middle period. Between 1989 and 2001, around 80 state-owned enterprises were privatized. It's just a dramatic number, and it makes the immense scale of this economic shift totally tangible. They were literally moving huge swaths of the economy out of state control in a relatively short amount of time. And breaking that data down gets even more interesting. Out of those 80 privatized entities, 25%, so that's 20 companies, were actually plantation companies. The remaining 75%, or 60 companies, were various other state enterprises. You have to remember, plantations were a massive, critical sector of the national economy. So shifting 20 of them to the private sector, that was a monumental move, designed to specifically hit those productivity and profitability goals we discussed earlier. But, well, here is where the harsh reality of economics sets in. Despite all the planning and structural reforms, some of these privatized enterprises face severe, crippling difficulties. In fact, they actually had to be taken back and reabsorbed by the state. It brilliantly, if a bit painfully, illustrates a crucial lesson in economic history. On-paper economicals don't always translate flawlessly into real-world reality. Despite those specific setbacks, however, the momentum didn't just stop. As we move past 2001, the government kept pushing for private investment, but they started looking at slightly different areas, specifically encouraging private sector participation in massive infrastructure sectors, namely petroleum and electricity. The pursuit of efficiency and reducing the government's burden was still very much alive in the early 2000s. Then, in 2004, we see a fascinating shift in the strategy. The Strategic Enterprise Management Agency, or SEMA, was formed. Now, why is this important? Because the strategy evolved based on those past experiences. SEMA was tasked with restructuring strategically important state enterprises. But here's the irony, right? They wanted private sector efficiency, but they absolutely refused to give up state ownership. It was kind of like they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. Section 5. The Ultimate Economic Aim. Bringing our narrative full circle here, everything we've discussed today really just boils down to three massive economic pillars. 1. Improve the efficiency, productivity, and profitability of public enterprises. 2. Encourage private investment and employment. And 3. Reduce the financial burden on the government. These three pillars, they really drove the entire narrative of Sri Lanka's privatization process, right from those early days in the 1980s all the way into the 2000s. Which leaves us with a final, very provocative thought to ponder. As we saw with that 2004 SEMA pivot, when a government retains ownership of a strategic asset but demands private sector efficiency, does that actually achieve those original 1987 economic goals of privatization? Or does it create an entirely new economic model altogether? Thank you so much for engaging with this explainer today. I really hope these insights helped you grasp the fascinating mechanics behind these historical economic shifts. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next one.